Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're decoding exactly why simply saying the word no feels so incredibly hard. And spoiler alert, it isn't about just being nice or lacking confidence. It's actually a deep biological drive for survival. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's put ourselves right into that visceral, physical terror for a second. Think about that instant wave of severe tension that hits you when you just try to decline a friend's favor or maybe set a basic limit with a coworker or a parent. Your chest instantly tightens, your heart starts racing. You probably feel that desperate, almost compulsive urge to over-explain or apologize profusely, like when you find yourself saying sorry to a waiter just for ordering a glass of water. It makes no logical sense, right? But physically, your body is reacting as if you were standing on the very edge of a cliff. And the craziest part, to your nervous system, you kind of are. Section 1. The terror of saying no. So it raises a really massive question. Why does setting a totally normal, simple boundary trigger an absolute existential panic? Well, to understand this, we have to look at the vagus nerve and our mammalian nervous system. You see, unlike reptiles, mammals evolved a very unique coping instinct. We literally require social bonding to regulate our physical bodies. A reptile doesn't need connection to survive, but a mammal absolutely does. So your nervous system doesn't treat social friction as just a mere inconvenience or an awkward moment. It treats it as an immediate biological threat to your attachment security. If you disconnect from the pack, biologically speaking, you die. To your ancient brain, saying no feels like you're getting kicked out of the tribe into the freezing cold. Section 2. Not a communication problem. Now, what's really fascinating about this is how it completely reframes our entire inability to say no. We have all been sold this false diagnosis. The self-help world tells us that people pleasers simply lack assertiveness, or they just haven't learned the right vocabulary to stand up for themselves, that you're just weak. But the clinical reality is wild. Your inability to say no is not a personal weakness at all. It is actually a highly successful evolutionary survival mechanism. Your nervous system is literally protecting you from the visceral feeling of childhood abandonment. It's doing this by preventing you from doing the one single thing that used to threaten your safety when you were young: disagreeing. In clinical psychology, this survival mechanism is called compliance, and we need to be really clear about what that means. A compliant personality is not forged out of some innate, pure kindness. It's forged out of a desperate, chameleon-like need to camouflage your own desires just to stay safe. Compliant individuals have incredibly fuzzy boundaries. They melt into the demands of others, and they just absorb the environment around them. Because the truth is, standing alone as a distinct, separate individual feels biologically terrifying. You make yourself small so you don't rock the boat, because an unrocked boat is a safe boat. Section 3. The childhood survival hardwiring. To truly understand where this terror comes from, we have to look backward at a foundational, uncompromising rule of human development. Infants must bond before they can set boundaries. We are fundamentally built for relationship. Because a child will always prioritize their own survival, they will always sacrifice their own boundaries to maintain a life-saving bond with a caregiver. Think about how vulnerable a human infant is. If a caregiver implicitly demands absolute compliance in exchange for love and care, that child will gladly abandon their own emerging identity to secure that love. There's no choice. It's literally life or death. And developmental psychology maps this out brilliantly, showing us exactly where these boundary injuries occur. It happens in phases. So right after initial bonding, an infant begins what's called hatching, around 5 months, taking an interest in the outside world. By 10 months, they are actively practicing independence. They're crawling away from the parent to explore. And then, by 15 months, they enter a crucial phase called rapprochement, where they check back in with the parent for emotional refueling. Now, here is the critical part. If, during these exact vital phases of testing autonomy, a child's separateness was met with punishment, the nervous system cataloged independence as inherently dangerous. But we have to be careful here, because what does that punishment actually look like? Most of the time, it's not overt, dramatic abuse. It is much more insidious. It's the subtle, devastating weapons of emotional withdrawal. Imagine an emotionally immature parent utilizing a sudden, icy 45-second silence because the child didn't want to hug them, or a sudden, deeply hurt tone of voice, or an overt crying spell that suddenly forces a tiny toddler to become the emotional caretaker of the adult, or just sharp, defensive criticism anytime the child expresses a different opinion. When a parent weaponizes a child's completely natural urge for separation, the child learns a brutal, permanent lesson. Asserting a boundary means the person I desperately need will disappear. Section 4. Conditional love and abandonment. And all of this brings us to this incredibly profound realization. If love felt conditional when you were young, saying no can feel like risking abandonment. Take a second to really let that sink in. If the early love in your household was a transaction entirely dependent on your complete, unwavering compliance, your adult brain does not view saying no to a boss or a partner as just a simple negotiation. It can't. It interprets setting a boundary as stepping off a sheer cliff into total, dark, terrifying isolation. There's a deeply moving clinical anecdote from the source material that captures this exact feeling perfectly. A highly functioning, successful adult named David described his childhood environment like this. He said, "I used to get this image of floating in the ocean with no one around me. That's how it felt at home." Just sit with that cinematic metaphor for a moment, floating in an endless, dark ocean, completely alone. This is the unseen, silent emptiness that high-functioning people-pleasers are carrying around with them every single day. They might look incredibly put together and successful on the outside, but inside, their nervous system is bracing against that feeling of floating in the ocean. They are utterly terrified that if they stop saying yes, all their connections will just evaporate. Section 5. The matrix of guilt. So to heal this, we have to uncompromisingly dissect this illusion of control. We call it the matrix of guilt. Look at the child's burden here, the deeply held belief that I am responsible for managing my parents' feelings. If mom is sad, I must fix it. If dad is angry, I must be perfectly quiet. As children, we were literally trained to absorb the emotional weather of the entire household just to survive. We became emotional lightning rods. But the adult's reality is entirely fundamentally different. The adult reality is, I am only responsible for my own choices, period. You are not responsible for another adult's reaction to your healthy, normal limits. Which leads us to perhaps the single most important concept we are going to cover today. Guilt is not an emergency. I'll say it again. Guilt is not an emergency. It is absolutely crucial to recognize that the intense, sickening, stomach-churning guilt you feel when you finally manage to say no is not a signal that you've done something morally wrong. You haven't hurt anyone. It is simply a phantom echo of childhood. It's old, outdated psychological software firing off in your brain, desperately trying to protect you from a threat that literally no longer exists. Section 6. Tolerating the survival guilt. So how do we actually build a path to freedom? How do we rewire this? It requires deliberately tolerating that discomfort. Step 1 is simply owning it. Admit your boundarylessness. Acknowledge that the intense guilt is going to happen and expect it. Welcome it even. Step 2 is to physically center yourself and observe that harsh internal voice without taking orders from it. When the panic hits, you have to focus on your breath. You do this to literally move the processing from your brain's emotional survival center right back into its logical prefrontal cortex. You slowly replace that harsh, terrified critic with a firm, protective self-compassion. And step 3 is tactical. Practice baby no's with safe people. You do not start your boundary journey by confronting your most difficult, toxic relative. That's a setup for failure. You start by telling a trusted, safe friend that you'd actually rather go to a different restaurant for lunch. You build the muscle slowly. And as you build that muscle, lean on this concept. It grants us such a profound, radical permission. It says, anyone has the right to ask you for anything, and you have the equal right to say no without giving a reason. Think about how incredibly freeing that is. You do not owe the world an exhaustive, logical defense of your right to exist. You don't need a bulletproof alibi or a doctor's note to turn down a simple invitation. No is a complete sentence. Internalizing and accepting this creates a beautiful, emotional space between yourself and the endless demands of the world. We're going to end this explainer with a very provocative, lingering question. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, if the person you are terrified to say no to right now, the person currently holding you emotionally hostage, if they just disappeared tomorrow, who would you safely turn to? If the honest answer is no one, then your fear of abandonment is completely driving the bus of your life. It is time to step out of those phantom echoes of the past. It's time to tolerate that initial terrifying spike of survival guilt and begin doing the hard work of establishing true differentiated safety with people who love you for your boundaries and not just for your compliance. Thank you so much for joining me today for this deep dive. Until next time, take care of yourselves and protect your space.